From the 44th, Delegate Kirby is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from the 26th yield for a question, please?
Adelaide.
Thank you, sir. I've heard repeated over the last couple weeks and specifically over the last couple days that retirees are specifically excluded from the effects of this bill, yet I have not been able to find it, and it's probably my shortcomings, but could you please point us to the language?
Well, the language is that they're actually in a separate plan. They're in a Medicare Advantage plan, which is an entirely separate thing. So PEIA has a different plan for our retirees. I'm sorry, excuse me.
So the fact that they're in a different type of plan altogether is the reason you don't see it specifically included in the language of this bill?
Gentleman's correct.
Would you agree with me, though, that the word retiree is repeated throughout this bill, though, in other sections?
The gentleman's correct.
Okay. Thank you, sir. May I speak to the bill, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, gentleman is recognized.
In this body, we often pass legislation to be competitive with surrounding states, or at least that's the reason we're told that this legislation or that legislation is needed. So let's talk some numbers. Average teacher salaries in surrounding states goes like this. Pennsylvania, $72,500. District of Columbia, $82,500. Maryland, $75,700. Virginia, $60,000. Ohio, $63,000, with an average of $74,000. West Virginia teachers, $50,000. And they did that because they were promised that if you stayed here, you and your family would have insurance that was reasonable and that was good, and that the state would continue to back you up and take care of you. They weren't just promised that initially when PEIA was created. They were promised that every time they showed up at this Capitol and told you that they weren't going to accept drastic and horrible cuts to this insurance program. So they can easily move across the state border to any neighboring state and see an instant jump in their annual income of almost 50%. And I would imagine after today's discussions, there's probably a lot of families that are going to have that conversation. Not only did they stay here in exchange for lower pay, for a promise to take care of their insurance and their family's insurance, now we have teachers with master's degrees that are working 2 or 3 jobs to pay their bills, just to make just to make ends meet. But it doesn't get any better for state workers in general. The average salary of our state workers is $35,000. And if all that wasn't bad enough, here comes the insult to injury. In the past year, we have spent more money as a legislative body on vacant positions than it would take to make PEI solvent for the next 3 years, possibly 4, depending on projections. In just the past year of 2022, 2,289 positions within our state government went unfilled, yet we spent $226 million on workers who did not exist. To be fair, though, 1,500 of these positions were teachers' jobs in this state, which was a jump from 750 in 2019, and by the end of this year, there'll probably be 3,000 if they're watching this debate. So just to be clear what we're about to do here and what we've done over the past year, we've taken better care of make-believe, non-existent state workers in empty chairs than we are taking care of the real ones who are up here in these galleries. Let that sink in for a moment before you vote on this bill. Now let's discuss this record quote-unquote surplus. 2 days ago, on March 2nd, as my good friend to my left said, the governor's office put out a press release bragging that revenue was up $1.1 billion over estimates for 2023. Not $1.1 billion that we've received, over estimates. Money that could be used on schools, bridges, drug treatment facilities, PEIA. Collections just for this past month of February were $112 million above estimates. That is not, again, the total collected. That is what came in over projections. Money that we should be using to fix this instead of pitting citizens against other citizens in this state. Severance taxes from coal and natural gas exceeded their projected year-to-date total by $540 million this year. In that same time period, the total severance taxes collected was $740 million. So let there be no mistake. This whole debate over tax cuts or PEIA is a false choice and a manufactured crisis contrived to pit us once again against one another. Please don't fall into this trap. Although I know it's tempting, because we all want these tax cuts for the people that are struggling back home. But at what cost? If our budget had been handled appropriately and responsibly, we could have easily funded PEIA and provided tax cuts to families and workers throughout this state with plenty of surplus left over to take back to your districts. Not just tax cuts aimed mainly at corporations, but significant tax cuts for every nurse, teacher, law enforcement officer, coal miner, and worker in this state. Tax cuts should go to our workers and retirees, not to multinational corporations. Speaking of that, people at home might be asking, where are all the billions of dollars we keep hearing about? Where did they go? I'll tell you where they went, and the legislative record of this body will show you exactly where they went. They went to the Economic Development Fund so that unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats could give your money away to their buddies for pet projects that most West Virginians don't want and they will never benefit from. So let's be clear, because you may hear this in a moment as a rebuttal to what I'm saying. When you hear the proponents of this department talk about investment, what they're really talking about are deals in which our government, our taxpayers' dollars are given not as loans, not as tax incentives, but are just given to international corporations, to some of the richest people in the world with zero guarantee that our people will ever get any return on our tax dollars, on their tax dollars. But let's get real in here. Let's call this what it really is. This is theft. Your state government is taking money that would otherwise and should otherwise go to our schools, our hospitals, our roads, and PEIA, and they are giving it to the Economic Development Department's slush fund so they can spend it at will on their pet projects for their buddies, for the elites. So we can go back and explain to our constituents how we had to slash their PEIA. We had to slash the tax cuts to where they were basically meaningless, except for manufacturers and big corporations. And here our people sit, the beloved people of our state, coming to us, having to beg for their money, beg for the crumbs of their money that's left, of what's left of after we sent most of it up north. This body, I submit to you, is Robin Hood upside down. Every day we come in here and we all vote on bills that take from the have-nots and give to the haves, all in the name of economic development. And we're told in our meetings and we're told in the hallways, Todd, we got to do this, bud. It's the way the game is played. Well, I, for one, am tired of playing this game, and so are these people, and so are the people watching us. What message does this bill send? What message does this bill send? It sends a message about our priorities. While we focus on trying to bribe multinational corporations into our state, we are betraying the very citizens of the state who sent us here. I'll give you an analogy from a teacher in my district. It's like we're the family on the street that doesn't feed our children or clothe our children, but we go down and take the neighbor's kids to Disney World twice a year. Sorry, kids. We're doing this for economic development. The great people of this state who were born here, who grew up here, and who decided to stay here out of love and loyalty to this state, and how do we repay them? They could have moved to South Carolina. They could have moved to Virginia. They could have moved to Florida or North Carolina, anywhere else in this country that we've given them every reason to. But they stayed here to try and help us build a better future. They stayed here because, like me, and most of you in here, they believed in the future of this state, a better mountain state. And it is a real shame that this bill before us is just more evidence that perhaps that optimism was misplaced. I would love to sit in on the conversations with the people that voted for 2882 and that will vote to reduce PEIA. As you explain to your voters, I'm sorry, ma'am, cancer patient, diabetic patient, I had to raise your premiums and reduce your tax cuts because Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos needed your money more than you needed it. On November 8, 2022, seems like years ago, the voters of this state placed their trust in this body, and all of us that are sitting in these chairs. They trusted us to move this state forward. They expected us to come in here and represent working class families who live in our respective districts. They were hoping there were enough of us who were willing to stand up to the establishment of both parties and the status quo that the elite class represents. Didn't happen. Instead, time after time, day after day, vote after vote, we have followed the herd and passed legislation that is not what the people want and is contrary to their interest. Why is it so hard for us to listen to our voters, the people that sent us here? Go to your email right now. Anybody that cares enough to, go to your email, type in 268 or PEIA, and if your inbox looks anything like mine, there's probably 250 emails telling you not to vote for this bill, and approximately 0 telling you to vote for it. But does the voice of the people even matter anymore in this House? I mean, it certainly didn't matter when it came to Form Energy. If you know this bill is not what the people want, then why would you vote for it? Are you afraid of losing your endorsements from the Chamber of Commerce? Are you afraid of losing your committee assignments? Are you afraid of losing your comfortable office and your facade of power? Maybe you're afraid of losing your next primary or general election. But I will tell you what you should be really afraid of. You should be afraid of losing this battle for the future of this state for the next generation who are counting on us before it is too late. And that day is coming upon us very soon. Because if this bill passes, we will see an exodus of teachers and state workers in this state. Then what will we do? The worst part of this whole debate, just bear with me, is that it is pitting West Virginians against each other unnecessarily. The people are told that if public employees do not accept these premium hikes and cuts to their benefits, then the rest of us can't have any tax cuts. Keep in mind, this is their money, this is your money, but a select few decided it was a better idea to give it away to billionaires. But there's plenty still coming in as we speak, so we can still fix this, which is even more reason that the people of this state and those of us in this chamber should have never been placed in this position. There is a pattern, if you haven't noticed in here. Every day, South versus North, coal versus gas, haves versus have-nots. If you didn't know better, it might seem like some of this might be intentional or purposeful. West Virginians should not be fighting with one another. Instead, they should be outraged at a system that has repeatedly sold them out for political and financial gain for a few at the top. I'm sorry to have to say all this. I am. Trust me. But I thought we were here to do the people's work, to implement and execute their will and their desires from their government, to work for their benefits. And I will tell you this, in my mind, in the people's mind at home, and everyone that will be reading about what happened here today, this is a fork in the road for this state and especially for this body. Are we going to keep ignoring the will of the people as we watch our communities, especially in the southern part of the state, continue their downward spiral? Or are we finally, in the last week of this legislature, going to start listening to the people and vote no on this bill? For the sake of the future of this state, I hope you can find the political will and courage to vote this bill down and send a clear message that will be heard across the Mountain State, that a new day has dawned and the people's house has been restored to the people for their benefit, not for corporations and not a select few. As someone who has stood beside protesters and activists on both sides of the aisle, I can tell you one thing. If we fail to send that message today that there is a new day for the people, these voters that are watching and that will read about this in the paper tomorrow will place new people in these seats who will fight for them. Sooner or later, change is coming, with or without you. Please vote no.
Gentleman from the 11th, Douglas Fehrenbacher.